The moon hung like a bleeding wound in the night sky, casting its sanguine light through the canopy of the Volthrun forest, a place where even the boldest human hunters dared not tread after sunset. The trees here were ancient beyond reckoning, their trunks thick as castle towers, their branches twisted into shapes that seemed to claw at the heavens in silent supplication. Fog rolled through the undergrowth like the breath of some slumbering titan, thick and cold, muffling all sounds save for the occasional snap of a branch or the distant cry of some creature that had learned too late the folly of wandering these woods after dark. Through this primordial darkness moved a figure of terrible beauty and lethal grace. Velithra Blackthorn was her name, though few who learned it lived long enough to speak it. She was a vampire war-bride, one of the 13 chosen consorts of the Crimson Lord Valdris, and she had walked this world for 3 centuries, leaving behind her a trail of broken kingdoms and rivers of blood that fed the dark earth. Tonight, as on so many nights before, she hunted. Her armor was a masterwork of infernal craftsmanship, blackened steel plates that curved to accentuate her powerful feminine form, etched with runes that pulsed with a faint crimson luminescence. Each piece had been forged in the volcanic heart of Mount Drakenmore and quenched in the blood of virgin warriors, making it impervious to mortal steel and blessed silver alike. Pauldrons rose from her shoulders like the ramparts of a dark fortress, while articulated plates protected her torso without restricting the lethal fluidity of her movements. Crimson fabric flowed from her waist like rivers of fresh blood, billowing behind her as she moved through the forest with preternatural speed. But it was her wings that truly marked her as something beyond the common vampire, vast appendages that stretched nearly 20 feet from tip to tip when fully extended. They were not the leathery bat wings of lesser bloodsuckers, but something far more magnificent and terrible. Membranous yet powerful, they bore patterns that resembled stained glass windows in some profane cathedral, veins of luminescent crimson running through them like rivers of liquid fire. When she moved through the air, they made no sound, as though the very atmosphere parted in reverence before her passage. Her face was a study in contradictions, beautiful beyond mortal comprehension yet terrible in its predatory perfection. High cheekbones caught the moonlight, casting shadows that accentuated features so flawless they seemed carved by divine hands corrupted by dark purpose. Her lips, full and sensuous, were the color of heart's blood, perpetually curved in a slight smile that promised both pleasure and pain. But it was her eyes that truly revealed her nature, glowing orbs of pure crimson that burned with an inner fire, pupils like vertical slits that could dilate wide enough to drink in every photon of available light, making her as deadly in absolute darkness as in the brightest day. Her hair cascaded down her back in waves of midnight black, shot through with streaks of deep crimson that seemed to move of their own accord, writhing like living serpents when her emotions ran high. It reached past her waist, wild and untamed despite the silver circlet that crowned her head, a circlet bearing a single blood-red gem that pulsed in time with her undead heart. Tonight, Velithra was engaged in her favorite pastime, the hunt. Not the simple slaughter that sustained her cursed existence, but the hunt with a capital H, the pursuit that made her dead heart quicken with something approaching the excitement she had known in mortal life. She had identified her prey 3 days prior in the village of Thornhaven, a young woodcutter named Mikhail who had shown uncommon courage in defending his sister from a pack of dire wolves. She had watched him from the shadows, studying his movements, learning his rhythms, savoring the anticipation as a connoisseur savors the bouquet of a fine wine before the first sip. She had given him 2 days' head start, whispering in his dreams, letting him know she was coming. She wanted him to run, to plan, to hope. Hope made the blood taste sweeter when the inevitable end came. And the end was always inevitable. Now, on the 3rd night, she pursued him through the Volthrun forest, following a trail as clear to her supernatural senses as painted signs would be to human eyes. The scent of his fear hung in the air like perfume, intoxicating and delicious. She could hear his heartbeat, rapid and panicked, thundering in his chest like a war drum even though he was still a quarter mile ahead. She could taste the salt of his sweat on the air, sense the heat of his blood pumping frantically through his veins. Velithra smiled, fangs gleaming in the moonlight as she leaped from tree to tree, her wings spreading occasionally to carry her across gaps that would have been impassable to earthbound creatures. The hunt had been good so far. Mikhail had shown more cunning than most, doubling back twice, wading through streams to mask his scent, even attempting to use wolfsbane and silver dust to ward her off. Such efforts were touching in their futility, like a mouse leaving cheese to distract a cat. She landed on a massive branch 30 feet above the forest floor, her armored boots making no sound on the ancient bark. Her wings folded against her back with a whisper of membrane on metal. Below, she could see the fog shifting, revealing glimpses of the forest floor where her prey had recently passed. She inhaled deeply, letting the night air fill her lungs. Unnecessary for her continued existence but a habit from mortal days that still brought her pleasure. "Run faster, little rabbit," she whispered, her voice carrying on the wind with unnatural clarity, knowing he would hear her even at this distance. "Make me work for my supper. Make me earn this exquisite moment when your warm blood finally touches my lips." In the distance, she heard his pace quicken, heard him stumble and curse, heard the desperate rasp of his breathing. Perfect. She waited exactly 1 minute, counting each second, letting him gain distance, letting hope kindle in his chest like a candle flame before a hurricane. Then she moved. Velithra launched herself from the branch, wings snapping open to catch the air, and she soared through the forest canopy like a nightmare made flesh. Trees blurred past her, branches that would have torn a normal creature to shreds parting before her as though in fear. The wind of her passage caused the fog below to swirl and eddy in her wake. Her armor sang a high, keening note as air rushed past its edges, a sound like the scream of a dying angel. She could see him now, crashing through the undergrowth below, his brown cloak tangled with brambles, his simple leather armor torn in a dozen places. He was larger than she had remembered, broad-shouldered and thick with the muscle that came from years of honest labor. His dark hair was plastered to his skull with sweat, and she could see the glint of something metal at his waist. A sword, perhaps? How delightful. She did so enjoy it when they fought back. Velithra folded her wings and dropped like a stone, landing directly in his path with an impact that sent a shockwave through the earth, causing the fog to explode outward in a perfect circle. Mikhail skidded to a halt, his boots leaving furrows in the leaf litter, his eyes wide with animal terror as he finally came face to face with his hunter. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across 20 feet of fog-shrouded forest floor. The moon chose that moment to break fully through the clouds, bathing them both in crimson light that seemed to set Velithra's armor ablaze. Her wings spread slowly, majestically, stretching to their full impressive span, blocking out the sky behind her and making her appear twice her already considerable size. The membranes caught the moonlight, glowing from within like sheets of ruby glass lit by hellfire. "Did you truly believe you could escape me?" Velithra asked, her voice rich and melodious, tinged with genuine amusement. "Did you think your pathetic mortal legs could carry you beyond the reach of one who has hunted kings and heroes across 300 years? To his credit, Mikhail did not break. His jaw set in a firm line, and his hand moved to the weapon at his belt. Not a sword she now saw, but a woodsman's axe, its blade worn but well maintained. "I knew I couldn't escape," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the terror she could smell pouring off him. "I just wanted to reach this place." Velithra's smile faltered slightly. "This place?" She looked around properly for the first time, taking in details beyond her prey. They stood in a natural clearing where a massive tree had fallen years ago, creating a gap in the canopy. The moonlight poured down in a solid shaft of red-tinged illumination, and she realized with a start that the fallen tree formed a perfect circle around them, its roots having torn up to create a natural arena. The fog seemed thicker here, almost reluctant to enter the clearing, pooling at the edges like a living thing. "How interesting," she purred, though a small thread of unease wound through her mind. "And what makes this place special, little rabbit? Did you think ancient ground would protect you? Did some village wise woman sell you a fairy tale about sacred circles and protective wards?" Mikhail's lips twitched, not quite a smile but something close. "No," he said simply. "I chose this place because it's where I wanted to make my stand. Where I wanted to die fighting if die I must. And because the footing is good." Before Velithra could process this statement, Mikhail moved. He was fast, far faster than any normal human had a right to be. The axe came free of his belt in a blur of motion, and he closed the distance between them in 3 powerful strides. The blade came down in an arc that would have cleaved her skull to the collarbone if it had connected. But Velithra was a vampire warbride, a creature that had danced through battlefields for 3 centuries. She swayed aside like smoke, letting the axe blade pass so close to her face that it stirred her hair. Her hand shot out, faster than thought, to catch his wrist and snap it like a dry twig. Except her hand didn't connect. Mikhail had already spun away, using the momentum of his swing to carry him past her, the axe blade continuing its arc to bite deep into a tree trunk behind her. She heard the solid thunk of steel in wood and felt a moment of surprise. He had anticipated her counter and used it to control his distance from her. "Oh," Velithra breathed, her eyes widening slightly with genuine pleasure. "Oh, you've been trained. Not just a woodcutter then. What are you, little rabbit? A retired soldier? A deserter from some lord's guard?" Mikhail didn't answer. He was already moving again, wrenching his axe free and coming at her from a different angle. This time when she dodged, he didn't overcommit, instead planting his feet and launching a rapid series of strikes that forced her to give ground. Each blow was calculated, precise, designed to limit her avenues of counterattack rather than to actually hit her. Velithra found herself actually having to try, having to think about her defense rather than simply allowing her supernatural reflexes to guide her. It was exhilarating. How long had it been since prey had made her work? Decades? A century? She laughed, the sound rich and genuine, echoing through the forest like the peal of bells in a cathedral. "Yes," she hissed, her fangs fully extended now, her wings spreading and flexing with her excitement. "Yes, fight me. Make this worth remembering." She stopped retreating and engaged properly, her hands moving in blurs as she deflected his strikes with her armored gauntlets, the impact sending sparks flying into the fog. Her strength was such that each parry should have shattered his arms, but she held back, playing with him, drawing out this delicious moment. Her wings swept forward, the tips whistling through the air as she tried to buffet him off balance, but he rolled under them, coming up inside her guard with the axe handle thrust upward toward her chin. She caught it inches from her face, her hand wrapping around the wooden shaft, and for a moment they stood locked together, his strength against hers. A contest that would have been laughable if not for the absolute determination blazing in his mortal eyes. They were brown, she noted, flecked with gold and utterly unafraid. How was that possible? How could he look at her, at death incarnate, and show no fear? "Remarkable," she whispered, her face inches from his. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear the blood singing through his veins, could smell the complex scent of him, sweat and leather and wood smoke and something else. Something indefinable that made her dead heart clench in a way she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. "You're remarkable." Then she casually ripped the axe from his hands and tossed it away into the fog. The spell broke. Mikhail stumbled backward, his hands empty, his chest heaving with exertion. Velithra advanced slowly, savoring this final moment, her wings spread wide, her eyes burning like coals fresh from the forge. "The dance is done, little rabbit," she said softly. "You fought well. Better than most. I will remember you and your blood will be a vintage I cherish. Take comfort in that as you." Mikhail's hand flashed to his back, and suddenly there was silver glinting in the moonlight. Not another axe. A sword, a genuine beautiful blade of folded steel with a silver edge that seemed to drink in the moonlight and reflect it back as pure white radiance. Ancient runes ran along its length, symbols she recognized from her mortal life, from the old faith that had been practiced before the Crimson Lords came to power. "This," Mikhail said quietly, his voice steady as stone, "is Salandris. Dawn's Edge. It was my father's and his father's before him. It has killed 17 vampires including a lord. Tonight, it will kill its first warbride." Velithra's eyes widened, not with fear but with something far more complex. That sword was no woodcutter's tool. It was a relic of the old order of the Solar Knights, warriors who had devoted their lives to fighting her kind. The order had been destroyed 2 centuries ago, wiped out to the last man by the Crimson Lord's armies. Or so she had believed. "Impossible," she breathed. "The order is dead. I helped kill them myself. I drank the blood of their Grand Master on the steps of their last temple." "The order is dead," Mikhail agreed, settling into a fighting stance that was utterly different from his earlier movements, formal, classical, perfect in its economy of motion. "But their swords remain, and their techniques, and their purpose." He raised the blade in salute, the gesture centuries old. My name is Mikhail Salandros, last of the House Salandros, nephew to the man whose blood you drank. And I am the trap you walked into. The words hit Velithra like a physical blow. Trap? She looked around again, seeing the clearing with new eyes. The perfect circle. The fallen tree. The way the moonlight seemed to focus here, brighter than it should be. And beneath her feet, she looked down and saw them, hidden beneath a thin layer of leaves and fog, silver lines inscribed in the earth, forming a pattern she recognized with dawning horror. A binding circle. A warding sigil designed specifically to contain vampiric entities. No, she snarled, leaping backward, her wings snapping open to carry her up and out of the circle. But she hit something invisible at the circle's edge, a barrier that felt like solid iron wrapped in burning sunlight. She fell back, landing in a crouch, her hands smoking where they had touched the barrier. Pain, actual pain, lanced through her, something she had not felt in decades. Mikhail hadn't moved. He simply stood in the center of the circle, sword held in a guard position, watching her with those steady brown eyes. The circle is key to the moon, he said calmly. As long as the red moon shines, you cannot leave. And he smiled then, and it was not a kind expression. I am not going anywhere. Velithra felt something utterly foreign course through her undead veins, uncertainty, followed immediately by rage. She threw herself at the barrier again, hammering at it with her fists, each impact sending showers of silver sparks cascading through the fog. The barrier held. Behind her, she heard Mikhail begin to advance, his boots crunching on the leaves, his breathing steady and controlled. She spun to face him, fangs bared, a snarl ripping from her throat that would have frozen the blood of any normal man. You dare. You miserable insect. You worm. I am Velithra Blackthorn, war-bride of the Crimson Throne. I have bathed in the blood of armies. I have. You have walked into my trap, Mikhail interrupted, still advancing. You have allowed your arrogance and your love of the hunt to blind you to the possibility that you might be the hunted. And now, Velithra Blackthorn, you will answer for 300 years of murder. He attacked. The fight that followed was unlike anything Velithra had experienced in her 3 centuries of unlife. Always before, she had been the superior force, the apex predator toying with helpless prey. Now, trapped within a circle of blessed silver with a vampire hunter wielding a holy blade, she found herself in a position she had never imagined possible, fighting for her very existence. Mikhail's opening strike was a downward cut that split the air with a sound like tearing silk. Velithra barely managed to avoid it, twisting her body at an angle that would have broken a mortal's spine. The blade passed so close she felt its heat, for the runes along its length were glowing now, burning with a pure white radiance that was anathema to her dark nature. Where it passed through the air, it left trails of light that lingered for heartbeats, as though reality itself was wounded by its passing. She lashed out with her wing, trying to buffet him aside, but he was ready for it. The blade came up in a fluid motion, and she felt agony unlike anything she had known since her turning as the blessed steel carved through the membrane of her wing. Black blood, thick and viscous, more like tar than any living fluid, sprayed from the wound, and she screamed, a sound of pure anguish that sent every living creature within a mile radius fleeing in blind terror. Velithra stumbled backward, clutching her damaged wing, feeling it try to regenerate and fail. The wound burned, the silver-edged blade leaving behind a poison that prevented her supernatural healing from closing the gash. She looked up at Mikhail with eyes that blazed not with hunger now but with genuine fury and, buried deep, barely acknowledged, the smallest seed of fear. First blood to me, Mikhail said quietly, already moving into his next attack. The blade came in low, aimed at her legs, and she had to leap straight up, her wings, even the damaged one, instinctively spreading to carry her higher. But the circle's barrier extended above as well as around, and she hit it hard, the impact driving her back down to earth. She landed in a crouch, and Mikhail's blade was already there, forcing her to roll aside, then roll again as he pursued with a relentless sequence of strikes. He wasn't faster than her, that would have been impossible. But he didn't need to be. The circle limited her movement, and he had trained for this, had clearly spent years preparing for this exact scenario. Every strike was placed to hurt her, to limit her options, to gradually wear her down. And that blade, that thrice-damned blade, was the one weapon in this forest that could actually kill her. Velithra snarled and decided that if she couldn't outmaneuver him, she would simply overpower him. Her hands shot out, no longer trying to dodge but to catch the blade directly. Her gauntlets might not be blessed, but they were forged of material strong enough to turn aside most weapons. Her fingers closed on the blade, stopping its descent toward her throat. Pain exploded through her hands as the runes along the sword's length flared brilliant white. She could feel her palms burning, could smell her own flesh charring even through the metal of her gauntlets. But she held on, teeth gritted against the agony, and wrenched the blade sideways with strength that should have torn it from his grip. Should have. Mikhail's hands remained locked on the hilt, his entire body moving with the blade rather than resisting, using her own strength against her. He spun, came inside her guard, and suddenly his shoulder was in her stomach, driving the air from her lungs. She flew backward, hit the barrier, and bounced off it into his rising knee, which caught her under the chin with enough force to snap her head back. Stars exploded across her vision, not a metaphor but actual points of light as her supernatural senses overloaded from the impact. She felt her feet leave the ground, felt herself tumbling through the air, and then she hit the earth hard enough to leave a crater in the soft loam. She lay there for a heartbeat, too, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She had been hit. She, Velithra Blackthorn, terror of a dozen kingdoms, had been physically struck by a mortal man. The sheer impossibility of it warred with the evidence of her own senses. Her jaw ached, actually ached, the bone cracked, already trying to heal but the process sluggish, hindered by the lingering essence of that blessed blade. Velithra surged to her feet with a roar that made the ancient trees around the clearing groan and shed their leaves. Her eyes blazed so brightly they cast crimson shadows, and the runes on her armor began to pulse in time with her racing thoughts. Power flooded through her, the dark gifts granted by her master, abilities she had not needed to call upon in decades. The air around her began to shimmer and distort as her rage manifested as nearly physical force. "Enough!" she shrieked, her voice carrying harmonics that existed below normal hearing, a frequency that resonated with the primal hindbrain and triggered every instinct that had kept humanity alive in a world of predators. "Enough of this mockery. I am War Bride. I am eternal. I am trapped," Mikhail said simply. He wasn't even breathing hard, she realized with mounting fury. The exertion that should have left a mortal man gasping had barely winded him. "You are trapped, Velithra. And I am patient. I can do this all night. Can you?" The question hung in the air like a dagger. Could she? The wound in her wing throbbed with each non-beat of her heart, refusing to heal. Her hands burned where they had gripped his blade, the pain a constant distraction. Her jaw ached. These were all minor wounds by themselves, but they were wounds nonetheless, injuries inflicted by a mortal man with a mortal weapon, and they weren't healing as they should. For the first time in 3 centuries, Velithra Blackthorn felt doubt. She pushed it aside with savage mental force and attacked again, but this time without elegance or grace. She fought like the war bride she was, like the battlefield terror that had earned her place at the Crimson Throne. Her fists moved in blurs, each strike backed by enough force to shatter stone. Her wings lashed out, the undamaged one whistling through the air like a blade, while the damaged one still served as a distraction, dripping black blood that hissed and steamed where it hit the ground. Mikhail met her assault with the discipline of a master. The blade wove patterns of light in the air, each movement economical, perfect, deflecting her strikes or causing her to pull back rather than impale herself on its edge. He gave ground when he needed to, pressed forward when she overextended, and slowly, inexorably, continued to land small cuts on her arms, her legs, her torso where the armor had joints and gaps. Death by 1,000 cuts, she realized. That was his strategy. He couldn't match her raw power, couldn't hope to land a killing blow while she was still strong and fast. But he didn't need to. He just needed to weaken her, to let the blessed wounds accumulate until she could no longer fight effectively. And then he would take her head. Just as she had taken the heads of so many victims over the centuries. The realization should have filled her with despair. Instead, it ignited something else, something she had not felt since her mortal days, since before the Crimson Lord Valdris had found her dying on a battlefield and offered her the dark gift. It ignited her will to survive, pure and simple, stripped of arrogance and certainty. She had forgotten what it felt like to fight for her life rather than for pleasure. She had forgotten the sharp, crystal clarity that came with genuine danger. Velithra changed her approach. She stopped trying to overpower him and started thinking, strategizing, adapting. If he wanted to wear her down, she would make him work for every cut. If he wanted patience, she would test the limits of his endurance. She began to fight smarter, using her environment, kicking up the fog to obscure his vision, using her wings to keep him off balance, feinting high and striking low. The battle became a true duel, predator and prey switching roles with each exchange. Mikhail scored his cuts, but they came fewer and farther between. Velithra's fists found their marks more often, each impact driving him backward, reminding him that for all his skill and preparation, he was still mortal flesh facing an immortal nightmare. His breathing became labored. Sweat poured down his face. His movements, while still precise, began to show the slightest hesitation of fatigue. But Velithra was tiring too, in a way she hadn't experienced in centuries. The wounds were accumulating, and her supernatural vitality, while vast, was not infinite, especially when drained by constant exposure to blessed silver. Her damaged wing hung limp, now useless. One eye was swollen nearly shut from a pommel strike she hadn't quite avoided. Cracks had appeared in her armor where his blade had found the same spots repeatedly. They separated by unspoken agreement, both of them breathing hard, though only one needed to, both bloodied, both beginning to understand that this fight might not end the way either had anticipated. Why? Velithra asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. Why go to such lengths? Why not simply join a hunter's guild, gather allies, come at me with overwhelming force? Why this elaborate trap? Mikhail leaned on his sword, the point dug into the earth, and for a moment he looked impossibly weary. Because overwhelming force is what you expect. It's what every hunter before me tried. And you slaughtered them all. He looked up at her, and she saw a depth of loss in those brown eyes that made something twist in her chest. You killed my uncle, my grandfather, 7 cousins. You destroyed my family over 3 generations because we dared to fight back against your kind. This, he gestured at the circle, at the trap he had laid. This is 3 lifetimes of planning. 3 lifetimes of waiting for the one war bride arrogant enough to hunt alone, confident enough to play with her prey, to give that prey time to prepare. And if I had simply killed you in your bed? Velithra asked, genuinely curious. If I had not chosen to hunt you, to give you those 3 days? Mikhail smiled, but it was sad. Then I would have died quickly and someone else would have eventually brought you down. But you did hunt me. Because that's what you do. It's not about survival for you anymore. It's about the game. The sport. His grip tightened on his sword. And I used that against you. Velithra felt something crack inside her. Not physical, but something deeper. Pride, perhaps. Or the certainty that had defined her existence for 3 centuries. She looked at this mortal man, this descendant of those she had murdered, who had turned himself into a living trap, and she felt respect. Grudging, unwilling, but genuine. You are a worthy opponent, Mikhail Salandros, she said formally, inclining her head in a gesture she had not made since her mortal days as a human warrior. Whatever happens here tonight, know that I acknowledge your skill and your cunning. I don't want your acknowledgement, Mikhail replied, raising his sword again. I want justice for every life you've taken. I want you to face the consequences of 300 years of murder. And I want... He hesitated and something shifted in his expression. Pain, deep and personal. I want this to mean something. I want your death to prove that monsters can be beaten, that the darkness doesn't always win. He attacked again and she met him and the dance resumed. But something had changed in both of them. They fought now not as predator and prey, but as equals. 2 warriors who understood that only one would leave this circle alive, and neither was certain anymore which one it would be. The red moon had crossed half the sky by the time both combatants began to truly feel the weight of their prolonged conflict. Mikhail's arms trembled with fatigue, his sword feeling like it weighed 100 pounds despite its perfectly balanced construction. Multiple ribs were cracked from glancing blows that had made it past his guard, and he suspected internal bleeding from the strike that had lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into the barrier. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each inhalation a spike of pain through his damaged torso. But Velithra looked worse. Her armor, that masterwork of infernal craftsmanship, hung in tatters from her frame. The silver-edged blade had carved through metal that should have been impervious, leaving gaping wounds in the plates that exposed pale flesh beneath. Flesh crisscrossed with cuts that refused to fully heal, weeping black blood that stained her crimson accents even darker. Her damaged wing had stopped trying to regenerate, hanging limp and useless. The other wing bore 3 new gashes that had reduced its function to barely half. Her beautiful face was a mask of blood and pain, one eye swollen shut, her perfect features marred by bruises that spoke to the tremendous punishment she had absorbed. Yet neither would yield. Neither could yield. The trap had become a crucible, and they were both being forged, or broken, by its heat. Mikhail launched another assault, his blade seeking her heart in a straight thrust that was textbook perfect despite his exhaustion. Velithra twisted, took the blade through her shoulder instead of her chest, and used her trap position to finally land a solid hit, her fist connecting with his jaw in an uppercut that lifted him completely off the ground. He flew backward, hit the earth, rolled, and somehow, impossibly, kept his grip on his sword. He used the momentum to come up in a defensive stance, just in time to deflect her follow-up strike with her gauntlet fist. The impact sent shock waves up his arms, and he felt something in his left wrist give way with a wet pop. His hand spasmed, nearly losing its grip on the sword hilt. Only years of training kept his fingers locked around the leather wrapping as white-hot pain lanced up his arm. He switched to a one-handed grip, his damaged left hand hanging useless at his side. Velithra saw the injury and pressed her advantage, raining down blows that forced him into pure defense. But even one-handed, the blessed blade was still deadly to her kind. She had to respect it, had to pull back from strikes that might have connected because the edge was always there, waiting hungry for her dark blood. And in pulling back, she gave him the precious split seconds he needed to recover, to breathe, to survive just a moment longer. "Why won't you die?" she snarled, frustration bleeding through her usual composure. "You are broken. Mortal. How are you still standing?" "Because," Mikhail grated out between clenched teeth, "I have to be. Because everyone I loved is dead because of creatures like you. Because if I fall here, it all meant nothing." He spat blood, his eyes blazing with determination that bordered on madness. "And because I'm taking you with me, even if I have to drag you into the grave by my teeth." They crashed together again, and this time there was nothing elegant about it. They grappled like bar brawlers, all technique abandoned in favor of raw survival. Mikhail slammed his forehead into her face, feeling her nose break beneath the impact. She responded by sinking her fangs into his shoulder, her supernatural strength allowing her to pierce through his leather armor and into the meat beneath. He screamed but didn't pull away. Instead, he drove his knee into her stomach repeatedly, each impact forcing air from her lungs in wheezing gasps. They fell together, rolling across the forest floor, each trying to gain the dominant position. Mikhail lost his sword in the struggle, heard it clatter away into the fog, and felt a moment of pure panic. But his hand found a rock, and he brought it down on her temple with all his remaining strength. What? Twice. 3 times. On the 4th impact the rock shattered, but so did something in Velithra. She went limp beneath him, her eyes rolling back to show only whites. Mikhail rolled off her, gasping, his entire body one massive ache. He crawled toward where his sword had fallen, his vision swimming, his left arm useless. His right hand closed on the hilt just as he heard movement behind him. He spun, bringing the blade up, and found Velithra struggling to her feet. She swayed like a tree in a hurricane, barely able to stand, but there was something in her crimson eyes, some spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Black blood poured from her scalp where he'd battered her with the rock. Her breathing, unnecessary but habitual, came in shuddering gasps. But she was standing. Still standing. Still fighting. "You should have run," Mikhail said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When you realized it was a trap. You could have waited out the moon, left when the circle fell with the dawn. Why didn't you?" Velithra's laugh was painful to hear, wet and broken. "Pride," she admitted. "The same fatal flaw that brought me here in the first place. How could I, Velithra Blackthorn, admit that a mortal had bested me? How could I flee from prey?" She wiped blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, the gesture almost dainty despite the violence surrounding them. Ironic, isn't it? The very trait that made me a successful hunter is what will kill me here. She took a step toward him and he raised his sword, though his arm shook with the effort. She took another step. Another. Each movement clearly cost her tremendously, but she kept coming. She had no weapons. No way to win. But she would not stop. Then come, Mikhail said, settling into a final stance despite his injuries. Come and meet your end, monster. Let this be finished. Velithra came, gathering the last reserves of her supernatural strength for one final assault. She moved faster than she had any right to, given her injuries, her remaining wings spreading to add power to her charge. Mikhail saw her coming, tracked her movement, and knew with absolute certainty that this was it, the final exchange. One of them would not walk away. Time seemed to slow as they closed the distance. Mikhail saw every detail with crystal clarity, the determination in her eyes, the way her hair streamed behind her like a banner, the moonlight reflecting off her ruined armor. He saw the exact angle of her approach, calculated his counter and began his strike. The blessed blade came up in a perfect arc, aimed to take her head from her shoulders. 3 centuries of murder would end in the next heartbeat. But something happened in that frozen moment before steel met flesh. Mikhail looked into Velithra's eyes and saw something he had not expected, had not prepared for in all his years of planning. He saw not a monster, not the nightmare that had slaughtered his family, but a being, a person, who had made terrible choices and was now facing the consequences of those choices with courage and defiance. He saw someone who, in another life, another time, might have been worthy of respect rather than hatred. And in that moment of hesitation, that single heartbeat where his resolve wavered, Velithra struck. But she didn't go for his throat or his heart. Her trajectory changed at the last possible instant, and instead of finishing him, she drove them both sideways. They hit the ground hard, and Mikhail felt something punch through his back with tremendous force. A broken branch from the fallen tree, driven through his lower back and emerging from his abdomen, impaling him to the earth. Agony unlike anything he had ever experienced flooded his nervous system. He tried to scream but could only manage a strangled gasp as his lungs seized. The sword fell from his nerveless fingers, landing in the leaves beside him. He looked down and saw the branch protruding from his stomach, saw the blood, his blood, red and human and far too much of it, pumping out around the wood. Velithra pushed herself up off him, staring down at what she'd done with an expression of absolute horror. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not. I didn't mean." Mikhail understood in a flash what had happened. She had seen the branch behind him, had realized in that final instant that his strike would carry him backward onto it after he killed her. She had changed her attack to knock him sideways instead, to save him from impaling himself. The predator in her final moment had protected her prey. "Why?" he gasped, each word agony. "Why would you? I was going to kill you." Velithra knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his wound, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. Her face, that beautiful, terrible face, was twisted with emotions he couldn't begin to name. "Because you showed me mercy," she said, her voice breaking. "In that moment before you struck. You hesitated. You saw me not as a monster but as a being worthy of a clean death. And she choked on her words. "I couldn't let you die like this. Not impaled like an animal. You deserved better." Mikhail's vision was starting to gray at the edges, his body going into shock from blood loss and trauma. He could feel his life pumping out of him with each heartbeat, could feel the cold creeping in from his extremities. He was dying. The trap had worked, the monster was defeated, but he was dying anyway. "Then finish it," he whispered. "Take my head. Make it quick. Please." "No," Velithra said fiercely. She looked around wildly, as if the answer to this impossible situation would manifest from the fog. "No, I won't let you die. Not like this. Not when I can." She trailed off, and Mikhail saw a terrible understanding dawn in her eyes. She looked at him, then at her wrist, then back at him. "There's a way," she said slowly. "One way you might survive. But you would have to." "No," Mikhail said immediately, understanding her meaning. "I won't become like you. I'd rather die human than live as a monster." "You wouldn't be like me," Velithra insisted, her words tumbling out in a rush. "You would be something different. The old texts speak of it, When a vampire shares blood with a mortal who has injured them significantly, who has proven themselves worthy in combat, you wouldn't be slave to a Crimson Lord. You wouldn't lose your soul. You would be something between. Neither fully alive nor fully undead. Mikhail wanted to refuse again, wanted to die with his principles intact. But his traitorous body clung to life with desperate ferocity. He thought of his family, of the decades of preparation that would end here in failure if he died. He thought of all the other people who would die to vampires like Velithra if he wasn't there to stop them. And he thought, God's help him, of the possibility that Velithra might be different than he'd believed. That perhaps monsters could change. If I do this, he gasped, you swear on whatever honor you have left, that you will stop hunting humans for sport. That you will not make me regret this. Velithra's eyes widened, then filled with something that might have been tears if vampires could cry. I swear, she said, her voice solemn as an oath before gods. I swear on my true name, on the memory of who I was before I became this. I will stop. I will change. I will, she took a shuddering breath. I will try to be worthy of this mercy you're showing me. Before Mikhail could change his mind, before doubt could stop him, he nodded. Velithra wasted no time. She bit into her wrist, black blood welling from the wound, and pressed it to his lips. Drink, she commanded. Drink and live. The taste was indescribable, copper and ash and something ancient and powerful that seemed to burn all the way down his throat. Mikhail drank, each swallow an act of will, each drop of dark blood warring with his body's natural revulsion. But beneath the horror, he felt something else, strength flowing into him, his wounds beginning to close, the pain receding to a distant roar rather than an all-consuming inferno. Velithra pulled her wrist away and immediately grabbed the branch impaling him. This will hurt, she warned, and then she pulled. Mikhail's scream echoed through the forest, sending night birds exploding from their roosts in blind panic. But when the branch came free, the wound began to close almost immediately, flesh knitting together in a way that should have been impossible, guided by the dark power now flowing through his veins. He lay gasping in the bloody leaves, his body shaking with shock and transformation, feeling things changing inside him at a fundamental level. His heartbeat slowed, each pulse becoming stronger, more deliberate. His vision sharpened, colors becoming more vivid even in the darkness. His hearing expanded, picking up sounds that should have been too quiet or too distant. The rustle of a mouse in the undergrowth 50 feet away, the whisper of bat wings high above, the sound of Velithra's breathing beside him. What? He began, then stopped, amazed at how different his own voice sounded, deeper, resonant with harmonics that hadn't been there before. What am I now? Velithra helped him sit up, her touch surprisingly gentle given the violence they'd just inflicted on each other. Something new, she said softly. Neither of my kind nor of your former kind. The text called them damper, daywalkers, those who existed in the space between life and death. You'll keep your soul, your ability to walk in sunlight, your mortal needs for food and sleep. But you'll also have strength, speed, senses beyond what you knew. And, she hesitated. And you'll age much more slowly. Not immortal, but not fully mortal either. Mikhail processed this, his enhanced mind working faster than it had moments before. He was changed fundamentally and permanently. But he was alive. And more importantly, he had the power now to actually make a difference in the fight against the darkness. He looked at Velithra, this creature who had been his sworn enemy, who had killed his family, who had just saved his life. What happens now? He asked. She smiled, a fragile expression on her battered face. Now we keep our oaths. You will hunt the true monsters, vampires who kill without thought or mercy. And I, she took a deep breath. I will try to remember what it means to be more than a monster. Perhaps I will even help you if you'll allow it. Why would you help me hunt your own kind? Because, Velithra said slowly as if discovering the truth as she spoke it, I'm tired. 300 years of darkness, of blood, of being feared and hated. You showed me in our battle that there's more to existence than power and domination. You showed me honor, courage, mercy, things I thought I'd lost forever when I became this. She gestured at herself, at her ruined armor and damaged wings. Maybe I can't reclaim my humanity, but maybe I can reclaim my honor. Mikhail studied her for a long moment, using his newly enhanced senses to search for any hint of deception. He found none, only sincerity, fear, hope, and a bone-deep weariness that matched his own. Slowly, painfully, he extended his hand. "Then let's begin," he said. "Partner." Velithra stared at his offered hand as if it were the most precious thing she'd ever seen. Then she took it, her grip firm despite her injuries, and they helped each other to their feet. Above them, the red moon had begun to set. Dawn was still hours away, but they could both feel it coming, the promise of a new day, of new possibilities. Around them, the circle's power was fading, the silver lines growing dim as the moon's light waned. Soon they would be free to leave this place that had been meant as an execution ground but had instead become the birthplace of something unprecedented. They didn't leave the clearing immediately. Both were too injured, too exhausted, and, though neither would readily admit it, too shaken by what had transpired. By unspoken agreement, they retreated to opposite sides of the circle, Velithra leaning against the fallen tree while Mikhail sat with his back to a still-standing trunk. The fog had begun to thin as the night deepened toward morning, and the first hints of pre-dawn gray were touching the eastern sky beyond the forest canopy. Mikhail used the time to catalog his new condition. Every sense seemed amplified. He could distinguish individual scents in the complex bouquet of the forest, could hear the hunting calls of owls miles away, could see in the darkness with a clarity that made the night seem bright as day. When he moved his injured wrist experimentally, he found it whole and functional, the damage healed as if it had never been. Even his cracked ribs no longer pained him. But there were darker changes too. He felt a distant pull toward Velithra, a connection he couldn't fully define but that seemed to pulse in time with her breathing. And beneath his newfound strength, he could feel something alien coiled in his chest. A hunger that was not quite like mortal hunger, a whisper that suggested how easy it would be to give in to the darkness fully, to embrace the power without restraint. He pushed those thoughts aside and looked across the clearing at his former enemy. She had managed to remove the most damaged pieces of her armor, revealing the extent of her injuries. Without the infernal protection, she looked smaller, more vulnerable. Her wings hung limp, both of them now, the damage too severe for even her supernatural healing to easily repair. She was cleaning her wounds with water from a flask she'd produced from somewhere, her movements methodical and weary. "How long?" Mikhail asked, breaking the silence. "How long before the others come looking for you?" Velithra looked up, her one good eye focusing on him. The other was still swollen shut, though he could see it was slowly improving. "The other war wives, you mean? Or my lord?" She considered. "I am expected to return within the week. If I don't, they'll assume I met my end and send another to investigate. Perhaps two. Will they sense what you did? That you turned someone?" "Not turned, transformed," she corrected. "There's a difference. And no, probably not. The connection between us is subtle, not the same as a true sire bond. But if they examine you closely, they'll know you're no longer fully human." She paused. "You'll need training. The change will make you stronger and faster, but using those abilities effectively requires practice. And you'll need to learn the signs of vampiric presence, the tells that separate the newly turned from the ancient ones, the locations of nests and courts." Mikhail nodded slowly. "You'll teach me." It wasn't a question, but Velithra answered anyway. "Yes. It's the least I can do, given what I've taken from you." Her expression grew haunted. "I remember them, you know. Your uncle. Your grandfather. Your cousins. I remember all of them." "Don't," Mikhail said sharply, then took a breath to control his rising anger. The emotion felt different now, hotter, more intense, harder to control. "Don't talk about them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Just focus on what comes next." Velithra nodded, accepting the boundary he'd drawn. "What has come next, Mikhail Salandros? You've trapped a war bride and turned the trap into an alliance. But to what end? Do you think the two of us can stand against the Crimson Lords and their armies? Do you imagine we can bring down 3 centuries of vampire supremacy?" "No," Mikhail admitted. "Not alone. But we can start. We can find others, humans who want to fight back, maybe even vampires who are tired of the endless bloodshed. You said yourself you're weary of the darkness. Are you the only one? In 300 years, hasn't there been a single vampire who questioned whether this path was right?" Velithra was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. There have been some, she said finally. Vampires who refused to hunt, who tried to exist on animal blood or took only what they needed from willing donors. They were hunted down by their own kind and destroyed. The Crimson Lords allow no deviation from their doctrine. We are the apex predators, humans are cattle, and any vampire who thinks otherwise is a traitor to their nature. But you know where some of them might have hidden? Where survivors might still exist. Perhaps. There are rumors. Whispers of vampires living in isolation, of small communities where vampire and human coexist in uneasy balance. I always dismissed such tales as fantasy, but, she met his eyes. But I was wrong about many things, it seems. It's possible some of those stories are true. Mikhail felt something stir in his chest, not quite hope but the precursor to it. A plan was forming, nebulous and uncertain, but a plan nonetheless. Then that's where we start. We find these rumored places. We build alliances. We prove that another way is possible. And then, he smiled grimly, then we bring the war to the Crimson Lords, but we fight it smart. Not armies clashing in open battle, we'd lose that fight. But surgical strikes, targeted assassinations, turning their own tactics against them. You're talking about a years-long campaign, Velithra said. Possibly decades. Are you prepared for that? Mikhail thought about the life he'd planned, simple, quiet, ending the moment he killed Velithra in this clearing. That life was gone, burned away in the crucible of their battle. What remained was something he was still discovering, but it was bigger than he'd imagined. More complex, more dangerous, and more worthwhile. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes, he said firmly. The question is, are you? Because this won't be easy for you. You'll be betraying your master, your sisters, everything you've known for 3 centuries. They'll hunt you with the same ruthlessness you once showed others. You'll be marked as traitor to your kind. Velithra laughed, the sound bitter but genuine. I think I was marked a traitor the moment I chose to save your life instead of taking it. There's no going back for me now, Mikhail. The only question is whether I go forward into meaningful purpose or simply wait for the inevitable moment when my past catches up with me. She pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the effort but standing firm. I choose forward. She crossed the clearing, her steps careful but steady, and extended her hand again, this time not to help him up but to seal an agreement. I, Velithra Blackthorn, Warbride of the Crimson Throne, swear to you a covenant. I will use my knowledge, my power, and my remaining years to help you fight against the darkness I once served. I will train you, guide you, and stand beside you against any who would continue the cycle of slaughter. This I swear on my true name, on the memory of who I was, and on the hope of who I might yet become. The words carried weight beyond mere sound. Mikhail felt them settle into the strange connection between them, felt them bind in a way that went deeper than mere promise. This was an oath in the old sense, the kind that could not be broken without destroying the one who broke it. He stood, taking her hand in his, and felt compelled to answer with equal formality. I, Mikhail Salandros, last of House Salandros, accept your covenant. I swear to judge you not by your past but by your actions from this moment forward. I will learn from you, fight beside you, and give you the chance to prove that redemption is possible even for those who have walked in darkness. This I swear on the memory of my fallen family and on the blade that carries my house's legacy. The moment the words left his mouth, Mikhail felt something snap into place. A bond that was not quite friendship, not quite partnership, but something uniquely their own. He could feel Velithra now, really feel her, her emotions a subtle undercurrent in his own awareness. Exhaustion. Pain. Fear. And beneath it all, a fragile, trembling hope that she barely dared acknowledge. So it's done, Velithra said softly, releasing his hand. We are bound now, you and I. For better or worse. For better or worse, Mikhail echoed. He looked toward the east where the sky was definitely lightening now. Dawn's coming. We should leave soon. Is there somewhere safe we can go? Somewhere to recover and plan our next move? Velithra considered. There's a place I know. An abandoned monastery in the Grimspire Mountains, 3 days' travel north. It was destroyed during the vampire wars, left as a ruin. No one goes there anymore, the locals think it's cursed. We could shelter there while we heal and decide our course. Then that's where we'll go. But first, Mikhail retrieved his sword from where it had fallen during their battle. The blade still gleamed with that soft silver light, unmarred despite the violence it had witnessed. I need to do something. He knelt beside the fallen tree and used the blade to carve words into the ancient wood. Velithra watched silently as he worked, understanding dawning as the message took shape. Here the hunter caught the hunted. Here the hunted spared the hunter. Here two enemies became something new. Remember this place. Remember that change is possible. When he finished, Mikhail stood and sheathed his sword. So that someone will know. So that if we fail in what we're about to attempt, at least this moment will be remembered. Proof that even the deepest hatreds can be overcome. Velithra stared at the carved words for a long moment, then nodded. It's a good memorial. Better than most I'll leave behind me. She spread her damaged wings experimentally, wincing at the pain but forcing them to extend. They wouldn't carry her far, but they would serve. Ready? Ready, Mikhail confirmed, and together they stepped beyond the circle's edge. The barrier had fully fallen with the setting of the red moon, and nothing prevented their exit now. They paused at the clearing's edge, both looking back one final time at the battlefield that had changed both their lives irrevocably. The fog had cleared entirely, revealing the scene in all its brutal honesty: blood-soaked earth, broken armor, scattered leaves torn up by their combat. It looked like what it was, a place where death had come calling and been barely turned away. Then they turned their faces toward the north and began walking. The first rays of true sunlight broke over the horizon as Mikhail and Velithra made their way through the Volthran forest. For Mikhail, it was a sight he'd seen thousands of times. The golden light filtering through leaves, painting the world in warm hues, bringing heat and life to the darkness. But it felt different now, as if he was seeing it through new eyes. Every color seemed more vivid, every shadow more defined. The transformation had changed even this basic experience. For Velithra it was something else entirely. She flinched when the first rays touched her, expecting the searing agony that vampire lore promised to all her kind who faced the dawn. But while the light was uncomfortable, a deep, penetrating heat that made her skin prickle and her eyes water, it didn't burn. She could walk in daylight, though it was unpleasant and draining in a way that darkness never was. Is it always like this? She asked, shading her eyes with her hand as they emerged from the thickest part of the forest into an area of younger growth. So bright? So loud? Mikhail glanced at her, noting how she squinted against the light, how she moved slower than she had in darkness. You've never seen a sunrise before? In 300 years. Not since my turning, Velithra admitted. I knew that as a war bride I could theoretically survive sunlight. Our kind are not as vulnerable as the newly turned or the lesser vampires. But it was never worth the discomfort. Why face the day when the night offered everything I needed? She paused. I didn't know what I was missing. They walked in silence for a while, following game trails that wound through the forest in roughly northern directions. Mikhail could feel his new body adjusting to exertion in unexpected ways. He could run for longer without tiring, could leap obstacles that would have required careful navigation before, could sense dangers before they materialized. When they surprised a brown bear foraging for mushrooms, the massive beast took one look at them and fled, some instinct warning it that these were predators of a different order. Your family, Velithra said eventually, the words clearly difficult. The ones I killed. Will you tell me about them? Not how they died, she added quickly, seeing him stiffen. But who they were. What they meant to you. Mikhail's first instinct was to refuse, to keep that pain locked away where it couldn't be used against him. But he found himself speaking anyway, words emerging as if compelled by some need he hadn't acknowledged. My grandfather was named Aldrich. He was the one who started it all, who found the records of the Solar Knights in an ancient library and decided that someone had to carry on their work. He trained my uncle Brennan, taught him everything he could recover from the fragmented texts. They worked together for 20 years, hunting vampires across 6 kingdoms. I remember them, Velithra said quietly. They destroyed a nest in Carthane, killed a lord named Sorinth. That's why I hunted them. Sorinth was not a friend. Vampires don't have friends but an ally. I tracked them for months. Grandfather died first. You caught him in his sleep in an inn in Torvale. Uncle Brennan found him in the morning, drained and cold. Mikhail's voice was flat, emotionless, but she could feel the pain beneath through their bond. He spent 5 years trying to avenge that death before you found him too. He managed to wound you. I heard the story from a survivor who saw the fight. Carved a piece out of your wing with a blessed blade. Velithra unconsciously flexed her wings, and Mikhail saw a scar there, paler than the surrounding membrane, a reminder of a battle 3 decades past. He was brave, she said, and skilled. I respected him even as I killed him. My cousins were younger. They thought they could succeed where their elders had failed. They lasted 6 months before you picked them off one by one. Mikhail closed his eyes briefly against the memory. I was supposed to be with them. I had fallen sick the week before they left on their hunt. That sickness saved my life and gave me the time I needed to plan this trap. And yet you chose to save me in the end, Velithra said, wonder in her voice. After everything I took from you. I don't understand. Neither do I entirely, Mikhail admitted. In that final moment I saw something in you, a person, not just a monster. Maybe it was your courage, continuing to fight even when you knew you'd lost. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe, he struggled for words. Maybe I was just tired of the cycle. Tired of death begetting death, vengeance begetting vengeance. You killed my family. I was about to kill you. And then what? Another of your kind would hunt me, or another of my line would hunt them, on and on until either vampires or humans ceased to exist. Breaking that cycle seemed more important than one more death, even yours. They emerged from the forest as he spoke, climbing a ridge that gave them their first clear view of the Grimspire Mountains in the distance. The peaks were dark against the morning sky, their tops lost in clouds, looking simultaneously majestic and forbidding. Somewhere in those mountains was the ruined monastery Velithra had mentioned, their destination and temporary sanctuary. 3 days' travel? Mikhail asked, studying the mountains and mentally calculating distances. If we travel slowly, accounting for your mortal limitations, Velithra said, then caught herself. Your former mortal limitations. Actually, with your new capabilities we might make it in 2. Faster if we travel through the night as well as the day. We'll need supplies. Food, water, medical supplies for me since I apparently still need such things. Information about what lies between here and there. Mikhail pointed to a thread of smoke rising from a valley to the west. There's a village that way. Small place called Millbrook if I remember my geography. We can resupply there. Velithra looked uncertain. Is that wise? I'm still recognizable as a vampire to anyone who looks closely. And you're bound to me now. Some of the more sensitive humans might sense that connection and react badly. Then we'll be careful. I'll do the talking, keep you hooded and in the background. We need supplies, and it's better to get them now while we're still relatively close to civilization than to wait until we're in the mountains with no options. They altered their course toward the village, descending from the ridge into cultivated lands, fields of wheat and barley beginning to show green in the spring warmth, orchards heavy with blossoms that filled the air with sweet scent. It was peaceful here, pastoral, the kind of place that seemed removed from concerns of vampires and ancient wars. But Mikhail knew better. Nowhere was truly safe. The darkness reached everywhere, even into seemingly idyllic valleys like this one. They reached Millbrook near midday, when the sun was at its highest and most uncomfortable for Velithra. She had draped herself in a cloak taken from her pack, which she'd retrieved from a cache near the clearing where they'd fought, with the hood pulled low to shadow her face. Her wings were bound tight against her back, hidden beneath the cloak's bulk. To a casual observer, she might pass for a human traveler, albeit a tall one with an odd posture. The village was small, maybe 50 buildings clustered around a central square with a mill, which gave the place its name, sitting beside a fast-flowing stream. The people here were going about their daily business. Farmers bringing produce to market, craftsmen working in open-air shops, children playing in the square under the watchful eyes of their mothers. Normal life, the kind Mikhail had once dreamed of having once his vendetta was complete. They made their way to the general store, a sturdy building with a sign depicting a cornucopia. Inside, the proprietor, a portly man with a magnificent mustache, looked up from his ledgers with a professional smile that faltered slightly when he took in his customers. His eyes lingered on Velithra's hooded form, and Mikhail saw a flicker of unease cross his features. "Help you folks?" the proprietor asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Supplies for a mountain journey," Mikhail said, keeping his voice friendly and open. Dried meat, hardtack, water skins, basic medical supplies. Rope and climbing gear if you have it. We're heading into the Grimspires. The proprietor's eyebrows rose. The Grimspires? Might I ask what business takes you to those cursed peaks? Nothing up there but ruins and monsters, or so the stories say. Research, Mikhail said, the lie coming smoothly. My companion and I are scholars interested in the history of the vampire wars. We believe there are records in the old monasteries that might have survived the destruction. Scholars, the proprietor repeated, his skepticism evident. His gaze flicked again to Velithra. Your companion doesn't say much. She has a condition that makes speech difficult, Mikhail improvised. An injury from our travels. I speak for both of us. The proprietor didn't look entirely convinced, but coin was coin. He began gathering the requested supplies, laying them out on the counter for inspection. As he worked, he kept up a running commentary about the village, the weather, the state of the roads, all the mundane chatter of a merchant trying to assess his customers. But then a child burst into the store, a girl of perhaps 8 years, her face flushed with excitement. Mr. Hendrik, there's soldiers coming. A whole troop of them with a flag I don't recognize. The proprietor, Hendrik, frowned. Soldiers? We're not on any major trade routes. What would soldiers be doing here? He moved to the window, peering out into the square, and Mikhail felt his enhanced senses prickle with warning. Something was wrong. Through their bond he felt Velithra tense. She had sensed it too. Danger approaching. Mikhail joined Hendrik at the window, looking out to see what had alarmed the child. A group of 20 mounted warriors had indeed entered the village square, their armor a distinctive combination of black plate and crimson cloth. Their banner bore a sigil that made Mikhail's blood run cold. A red moon over a field of black, the symbol of the Crimson Lords themselves. Vampire hunters? Hendrik breathed, relief evident in his voice. Thank the gods. We've had disappearances lately, 2 people in the last month just vanished without a trace. Maybe these soldiers can help. But Velithra had gone absolutely still beside Mikhail, and through their bond he felt waves of fear radiating from her. Not hunters, she whispered, her voice so low only his enhanced hearing could pick it up. Death Knights. The Crimson Lord's personal enforcers. They hunt rogue vampires and anyone who helps them. Mikhail's mind raced. This couldn't be coincidence. It was too soon for anyone to have missed Velithra, too soon for a search party to have been dispatched. Unless someone had already been looking for something else and simply happened to be in the area. The leader of the Death Knights dismounted, a tall figure whose face was hidden behind an ornate helmet. When he spoke, his voice carried across the square with unnatural clarity, a minor magic that ensured everyone in the village could hear his words. People of Millbrook, I am Commander Kane of the Crimson Lord's Death Knights. We seek information about a vampire who may have passed through this region in recent days. She is a war bride, tall, with black wings and crimson eyes. She may be injured. Anyone who has seen her or has information about her whereabouts will be generously rewarded. Anyone found to be harboring her will be executed. Mikhail felt his stomach drop. They knew. Somehow, impossibly, they already knew Velithra was missing and were searching for her. Oh. She'd said she had a week before anyone would notice her absence. Through their bond, he felt Velithra's bitter realization. The blood oath, she whispered. I swore an oath to my lord when I became war bride. It's supposed to alert him only if I'm destroyed, but perhaps when I shared my blood with you, when I fundamentally changed the nature of my existence, it registered as a kind of death. He knows something happened. They needed to leave. No. But the Death Knights had positioned themselves at all the village's exits, and any attempt to flee would immediately mark them as suspicious. Mikhail's hand moved instinctively to his sword, hidden beneath his own travel cloak, but that was a last resort. They couldn't fight 20 Death Knights and survive, not in their current condition. What do we do? He breathed, keeping his lips barely moving. Velithra was silent for a moment, and he could feel her mind working through options and discarding them one by one. Then, we hide in plain sight. Death Knights are attuned to vampiric energy. They can sense full vampires at close range. But you're only half-turned and she paused, then continued with grim determination. I can suppress my aura, make myself seem nearly human. It's draining and I can't hold it forever, but for a few minutes I can pass. If we act naturally, don't run, don't fight, they might not realize who we are. It was a terrible plan, Mikhail thought. Too many ways it could go wrong. But it was the only plan they had. Hendrik turned from the window, his face troubled. I hope you scholars weren't planning to leave today. Looks like the soldiers are stopping and questioning everyone. Could be here for hours. That's fine, Mikhail said, forcing his voice to remain calm. We'll wait it out. Perhaps you could add some lamp oil to our supplies? If we're going to be delayed, we might as well ensure we're fully prepared. As Hendrik returned to gathering supplies, Mikhail and Velithra positioned themselves toward the back of the store, away from the windows but not so far back as to seem like they were hiding. Through the bond, he could feel the strain as Velithra suppressed her nature, forcing her vampiric essence to retract inward, hiding it beneath a carefully constructed facade of humanity. It was costing her tremendously, sweat beaded on her forehead, and her hands trembled slightly where they gripped her cloak. How long can you hold it? Mikhail asked quietly. Long enough, she replied, though he felt her uncertainty. As long as they don't touch me. Physical contact would reveal the truth immediately. Minutes crawled past like hours as they listened to the Death Knights moving through the village, questioning the inhabitants, searching buildings. Slowly, inexorably, the searchers were working their way toward the general store. Mikhail forced himself to breathe normally, to project calm he didn't feel, to not do anything that would draw attention. The door opened and Commander Kane himself entered, his armor seeming to drink in the light from the store's windows. His helmet remained on, hiding his features, but Mikhail could feel the power radiating from him, old, dangerous, absolutely ruthless. Behind him came two more Death Knights, their hands resting on sword hilts. Hendrik straightened, his merchant's instincts warring with his nervousness. Commander, welcome. How can I assist the Crimson Lords? Kane's helmeted gaze swept the store, passing over shelves of goods, the counter, and then settling on Mikhail and Velithra. Mikhail felt rather than saw the intensity of that scrutiny, felt magical senses probing at them, searching for any hint of vampiric taint. These two, Kane said, his voice flat and emotionless. Who are they? Scholars, Hendrik said quickly. They're provisioning for a journey into the Grimspires. Something about researching the old wars. Scholars, Kane repeated in a tone that suggested he'd rarely heard anything less believable. He took a step toward them. Remove your hoods. Both of you. This was it. The moment of truth. If Velithra lowered her hood, her inhuman features would be visible even with her aura suppressed. But refusing would confirm their guilt just as surely. They were trapped. Mikhail made a decision. He stepped forward, placing himself partially between Velithra and the Death Knights. My companion is injured, he said, adding a note of protectiveness to his voice. She was attacked by bandits on the road north of here. Her face is not pleasant to look upon at the moment. I'd prefer not to cause her additional distress by forcing her to display her injuries to strangers. It was a gamble, playing on whatever remnant of human decency might remain in these dark warriors. Kane stood motionless for a long moment, and Mikhail could feel magical energy building around him, could sense the Death Knight preparing to simply rip the truth from them by force if necessary. Then, unexpectedly, one of the other Death Knights spoke. Commander, there's a commotion in the East Quarter. Someone tried to flee when we approached. Might be our quarry. Kane's attention snapped away from them. Contain the area. I want whoever tried to run brought to me alive. He glanced back at Mikhail and Velithra. You two don't leave this village until we've cleared you. Understood. Perfectly, Mikhail said, keeping his voice level despite his racing heart. The Death Knights swept out as quickly as they'd entered, their focus now on the new development. Mikhail and Velithra remained frozen until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Only then did Velithra allow her suppression to drop, gasping as her true nature reasserted itself. She swayed and Mikhail caught her before she could fall, supporting her weight. We need to leave, she whispered. Now while they're distracted. That commotion won't keep them busy forever, and when they realize their quarry was just a frightened villager, they'll return to their systematic search. We won't survive another encounter. Hendrik was staring at them now, his merchant's intuition finally putting pieces together. You're not scholars, he said slowly. You're what they're looking for. You're... Please, Mikhail said, meeting the man's eyes directly. We don't want to hurt anyone. We just need to leave quietly. Whatever reward they're offering, it's not worth the cost of giving us up. They'll kill you, Hendrik said. It wasn't clear whether he meant the Death Knights would kill Mikhail and Velithra, or that they would kill Hendrik if he helped them escape. Yes, Mikhail agreed simply. But we're going to try to not let that happen. Will you help us, or do we need to find another way? Hendrik wrestled with his conscience for a long moment. Then, seeming to come to a decision, he pointed toward the back of the store. There's a cellar access in the storeroom. Tunnels beneath the village, old smuggler routes from when this region wasn't so peaceful. They exit near the old mill race, outside the knight's perimeter. But if anyone asks... You never saw us, Mikhail finished. Thank you. More than you know. They moved quickly into the storeroom, Mikhail supporting Velithra as she continued to recover from the strain of suppressing her nature. Hendrik showed them the hidden door in the floor, then pressed a bundle into Mikhail's hands, the supplies they'd been purchasing. No charge, the merchant said gruffly. Just, whatever you're running from, whatever you're trying to do, I hope it's worth it. And I hope you make it. It is, Mikhail assured him. We're trying to stop this. All of it. The hunting, the fear, the death. It's going to take time, but we're going to try. Hendrik gave him a long look, then nodded. Then go. Quickly. And may whatever gods are still listening show you mercy. They descended into the tunnels, Velithra's enhanced vision allowing her to lead despite the darkness. Behind them, they heard the trapdoor close and the sound of Hendrik moving furniture over it. The tunnels were narrow, damp, smelling of earth and old stone. But they were a lifeline, a path to freedom that the Death Knights hadn't anticipated. As they hurried through the darkness, Mikhail found himself thinking about Hendrik's final words. May the gods show you mercy. He hoped they would. Because what he and Velithra were attempting, building a coalition to oppose the Crimson Lords, breaking the cycle of violence that had defined vampire-human relations for centuries, would require more than courage and skill. It would require luck, divine or otherwise. They emerged from the tunnels near sunset, in a copse of trees well outside the village's boundaries. In the distance, they could see the Death Knights still searching, could hear their frustrated orders carrying on the evening wind. But Mikhail and Velithra were clear at least for now. 2 days to the monastery, Velithra said, her strength returning now that night was falling. We can rest there, plan our next move. And I can begin teaching you what you need to know about the supernatural world you've joined. Then let's not waste time, Mikhail said. He looked back once at the village, at the place where a simple merchant had made the choice to help strangers in need, potentially at great cost to himself. That kindness, that courage was what they were fighting for. The possibility that such moments could become common rather than rare. That humanity and vampires might find a way to coexist that didn't require one to dominate the other. It seemed impossible, a dream too fragile to survive contact with reality. But as they set off into the gathering darkness, Mikhail allowed himself to hope. Because if a vampire war bride and her would-be killer could find a way to become allies, then perhaps anything was possible. The monastery in the Grimspire Mountains had been magnificent once. Mikhail could see evidence of its former glory in the soaring arches that still stood despite centuries of neglect, in the intricate carvings that decorated the surviving walls, in the remnants of stained glass that caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across rubble-strewn floors. It had been a place of worship, of learning, of sanctuary. Then the vampire wars had come, and like so many other bastions of the old world, it had fallen. Now it was their shelter, temporary home to the most unlikely alliance either of them had ever imagined. They had claimed one of the more intact sections as their living quarters, a former library whose roof had somehow survived intact, protecting the space from the worst of the mountain weather. Velithra had used her supernatural strength to clear debris, while Mikhail had applied his practical skills to making the space livable. They had fire for heat, the supplies from Millbrook supplemented by game Mikhail hunted in the surrounding forests, and, most importantly, isolation. No one would find them here unless they wanted to be found. 3 weeks had passed since their flight from Millbrook. 3 weeks during which Velithra had begun teaching Mikhail the truth about vampires, not the legends and half-truths that humans told themselves, but the reality of vampiric society, its hierarchies and politics and the complex web of power that sustained the Crimson Lord's rule. 3 weeks of training, during which Mikhail learned to control his enhanced abilities, to fight not just with human skill but with the supernatural speed and strength that now flowed through his veins. And 3 weeks of slowly, carefully learning to trust each other. It wasn't easy. Too much history lay between them, too much pain. But necessity forced cooperation, and cooperation gradually fostered something that might eventually become understanding. Mikhail found himself listening to Velithra's stories of her mortal life. She had been a warrior even then, a shield maiden who fought in the wars of petty kingdoms long since fallen to dust. She spoke of the battle where she'd fallen, mortally wounded, expecting death. And she spoke of Valdris, the Crimson Lord who had found her and offered a devil's bargain. Life eternal in exchange for service. "I thought I was choosing strength," she said one evening as they sat by the fire in their repurposed library. "Choosing to survive when the alternative was to die forgotten on some nameless battlefield. I didn't understand what I was giving up. What I would become. Do you regret it?" Mikhail asked. Velithra stared into the flames for a long moment. "I regret the things I did after. The people I killed, the cruelty I showed, the way I reveled in being apex predator. But the choice to survive." She shook her head. "No. Because if I died on that battlefield, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have the chance to try to make amends. Even eternal damnation is better than nothing, if you can find a way to turn it toward purpose." Mikhail understood that sentiment better than he wanted to admit. His own choice, to accept her blood, to transform himself into something neither fully human nor vampire, had been equally motivated by the desire to survive, to continue fighting. And like her, he couldn't regret it despite the cost. Because he was still here, still capable of making a difference. On their 21st day in the monastery, as Mikhail practiced advanced sword forms under Velithra's critical eye, they had their first visitor. Mikhail sensed the approach first. His connection to Velithra allowed him to piggyback on her supernatural awareness, feeling the presence that entered the monastery's grounds like a ripple in still water. He immediately fell into a defensive stance, sword drawn, his body positioned between the entrance and Velithra. But she placed a hand on his shoulder, staying his blade. "Wait," she said. "I know this presence. It's unexpected but not immediately hostile." A figure emerged from the shadows of the entrance. A woman, tall and slender, with skin like polished ebony and eyes that glowed with a soft amber light. She wore robes of deep blue that seemed to shimmer with starlight, and her movements had the fluid grace of something not entirely corporeal. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. "Velithra Blackthorn," the visitor said. "The Crimson Lords seek you with great fervor. They name you traitor, oath-breaker, and have placed a price on your head that would tempt even the most loyal servants. And yet here you are, hiding in this ruin with a damper who smells of both human blood and vampiric essence. How interesting." "Selenia," Velithra replied, inclining her head in a gesture that might have been respect. "I didn't expect to see you this far from the Twilight Courts. What brings a twilight witch to a forgotten monastery?" "Curiosity," Selenia said, moving into the library with steps that left no footprints, as if she weighed nothing at all. "When I heard rumors of a war bride who had abandoned her post, who had apparently formed some sort of bond with a human hunter, I had to see for myself if the impossible had occurred." She studied them both with eyes that seemed to see far more than surface appearances. "And it appears it has. A damper born of cooperation rather than violence, and a war bride attempting something that looks suspiciously like redemption. The fates must be laughing." "Are you here to collect the bounty?" Mikhail asked, his sword still drawn despite Velithra's gesture of peace. Selenia laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a midnight breeze. "Child, if I wanted you dead, you would never have seen me coming. No, I'm here because—" she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Because I have lived for a very long time, and in all those years, I have never seen anyone successfully break free of a Crimson Lord's influence. The transformation that Velithra underwent should have killed her or driven her mad. That it did neither suggests something unprecedented is at work. And unprecedented things interest me." "You're a neutral party," Velithra said slowly. "The Twilight Witches serve neither vampire nor human, neither light nor dark. You observe and record, but rarely intervene. Observe, record, and occasionally guide, Selenia corrected. When we see something that might shift the balance in interesting ways. You too represent such a shift. A vampire attempting to change her nature, and a human accepting transformation to gain the power to fight back. It's the stuff of legends if you survive long enough to become legendary. She settled herself on a piece of rubble as if it were a throne, arranging her robes with precise movements. So I've come to offer information. Knowledge that might help you survive the coming storm. Because make no mistake, the Crimson Lords will not stop hunting you, Velithra. They cannot allow the precedent of a war bride breaking her oaths and surviving. Every vampire in their service would see it as proof that escape is possible. What kind of information? Mikhail asked, still wary but intrigued despite himself. The locations of others like you, Selenia said. Not exact matches. There are no other dampers so recently made, and Velithra remains unique in her transformation. But there are vampires who have rejected the Crimson Lord's philosophy. Humans who have learned to fight with more than simple steel and courage. Communities where both races coexist in fragile peace. I can point you toward these places, give you a starting point for building the alliance you're already dreaming about. It was exactly what they needed, and that very fact made Mikhail suspicious. Why would you help us? What do you gain from this? Selenia smiled, showing teeth that were slightly too sharp, too white. What do I gain? A better story, perhaps. The chance to see how this unprecedented situation resolves. Or, her expression grew more serious. Perhaps I'm simply tired of the Crimson Lord's dominion. Perhaps even one who has lived as long as I have can grow weary of watching the same cycles of violence repeat endlessly. Perhaps I'd like to see if something new is possible. Velithra and Mikhail exchanged glances, communicating volumes through their bond. Trust was dangerous, especially trust given too easily. But they needed allies, needed knowledge, and Selenia was offering both. We'll accept your help, Velithra decided. But we'll verify everything you tell us. And if this is a trap, then you'll die fighting as you would have anyway, Selenia interrupted. But it's not a trap. I have no love for the Crimson Lords, and even less interest in serving as their hound. She produced a rolled parchment from somewhere in her robes and set it on a relatively intact table. This is a map. Marked on it are 7 locations where you might find potential allies. Some are more dangerous than others. Some may refuse to help. But all of them represent cracks in the Crimson Lord's absolute authority. Proof that resistance exists if one knows where to look. Mikhail moved to study the map, his enhanced vision allowing him to make out the details even in the flickering firelight. The locations were scattered across multiple kingdoms and regions, some in civilized lands, others in wildernesses that few humans had explored. Each was marked with a symbol that presumably indicated what they might find there. Start with the Shadowfen Compact, Selenia advised, pointing to a mark in the southeast. It's the closest and the most stable. A community of humans and vampires who have maintained peaceful coexistence for nearly a century. They're small, isolated, and paranoid about outsiders, but if you can gain their trust, they can teach you how to make such arrangements work. A century? Mikhail said, surprised. I've never heard of such a place. Few have. They work very hard to stay hidden. The Crimson Lords would destroy them if their existence became widely known. They represent everything the Lords oppose. But they endure, proof that another way is possible. Velithra leaned over the map, her eyes bright with an emotion Mikhail recognized through their bond as hope. Real hope, not the fragile thing that had sustained her these past weeks but something stronger, more substantial. And the others? Varied, Selenia said. A coven of vampires who feed only on animals and volunteers. A human mage who has developed wards that can contain even elder vampires. A damper, one much older than your companion Mikhail, who has spent decades hunting rogue vampires. Each represents a piece of the coalition you'll need if you're serious about challenging the Crimson Lord's power. She stood, her form seeming to fade slightly, becoming translucent. I've given you a starting point. What you do with it is your choice. But I'll be watching, and if you succeed in building something real, something that threatens to actually change the balance, well, you may find you have more allies than you expected. The Twilight Witches are not the only ones tired of endless night. Wait, Mikhail said as she began to turn away. Why now? If you've been waiting for someone to attempt this, why appear now rather than years ago or decades ago? Selenia paused, glancing back over her shoulder. Because you're the first who had any real chance of succeeding. Warriors have tried to build resistance before. Vampires have attempted to break free of the Crimson Lords. But never together. Never with the combination of inside knowledge and outside perspective, supernatural power and human determination. You too, she smiled again, and this time it seemed genuine. You too are something new. And new things can change the world if they're strong enough to survive being born. Then she was gone, fading into shadows that seemed too deep for natural darkness, leaving behind only the map and the lingering scent of ozone and midnight flowers. Mikhail and Velithra stood in silence for a long moment, processing what had just occurred. Then Velithra spoke, her voice quiet but certain. She's right. We have a chance here. A real chance to build something that matters. But it's going to be dangerous. More dangerous than anything either of us has faced before. I know, Mikhail said. He looked at the map, at the 7 marks that represented potential allies in future battles, the beginning of a campaign that might take years or decades to complete. But it's what we've sworn to do. To break the cycle. To prove that change is possible. To prove that redemption is possible, Velithra added. She placed her hand over his where it rested on the map, her skin cool but no longer feeling like the touch of death. Just different. Just Velithra. Even for monsters like me. You're not a monster, Mikhail said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. She had been once. Had done monstrous things that couldn't be excused or erased. But the being standing beside him now, the one who had saved his life at cost to her own safety, who was willing to betray everything she'd known for 3 centuries in hope of making amends, that being was something more complex than simple monster or simple saint. She was, like him, someone trying to be better than her past. They spent the rest of the night studying the map, planning their approach to the Shadowfen Compact, discussing strategies and contingencies. As the false dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of purple and gold, Mikhail found himself filled with a strange emotion, not quite optimism, too tempered by realism for that, but something close. A sense of purpose. A feeling that what they were doing mattered, that they were part of something larger than themselves. As true dawn broke over the Grimspire Mountains, painting the ruins of the monastery in golden light, Mikhail and Velithra stood together at one of the broken windows, watching the sun rise. For Velithra, it was still uncomfortable, still required her to squint against the brightness. But she didn't turn away. She stood there beside her unlikely partner and watched the day begin. It's beautiful, she said softly. I'd forgotten how beautiful dawn could be. How it represents not just the end of darkness but the beginning of something new. That's us now, Mikhail said. The beginning of something new. We don't know if it will succeed. We don't know if we'll survive long enough to see it through. But we're trying. And sometimes trying is enough. Velithra nodded, and through their bond he felt her acceptance, her determination, and beneath it all, her gratitude. Not for her life, though he had saved that too, but for the chance he'd given her. The chance to be more than the monster she'd become. The chance at redemption. They stood there as the sun climbed higher, vampire and damper, former enemies now bound by oath and purpose, watching the dawn and preparing for the long road ahead. There would be battles. There would be setbacks. There would be moments when the darkness seemed too strong to overcome. But there would also be this. The two of them standing together against the night, proving that even the deepest hatreds could be overcome, that even the most fallen could climb toward redemption, that change, real, fundamental change, was possible. If they were willing to fight for it. And they were. The dawn painted them both in gold as they turned from the window and began preparing for their journey. 7 locations. 7 chances to build their coalition. 7 steps on a path that might end in victory or death or something neither could yet imagine. But wherever it led, they would walk it together. The hunter and the hunted. The human and the vampire. Partners in the strangest alliance the world had ever seen, bound by oath and blood and the fragile, precious hope that monsters could change, that cycles could be broken, and that even in a world of darkness, dawn would always come again.